this computer. Great. So, if you don't mind me asking, Angela, what's your drive time look like? Because I know you're not geographically that far off from some of those areas, but I know hitting the traffic in and out of DC and some of those areas can be a little bit difficult. So, for anyone that you actively work, what are some of the long timelines that you have, or like driving distance and drive times that you have for helping your clients out? Stacy's.
The longest drive time that I can remember right now is 2 hours. I have a closing today, which is an hour and a half away.
Oh my gosh.
Normally because I actually live in Waldorf, Maryland, which is Southern Maryland. So, um, most of my clients are at least 40 minutes away minimum. So I get excited when somebody wants to look in Waldorf because it's so close.
It happens to me so much. I live in an area of DFW that's far north, and I've lived in Dallas for a long time. So, I had this question earlier today from a client that was asking me if I live in Dallas. And, if I tell them where I live, they're going to say, well, or even where my office is, they're going to say, well, how can you help me? I have to remind people that I work all over the area, that I've lived in so many of these areas. So I know them all very well, but, I pass so many markets going to where I'm going that I'm just like, why couldn't you have been looking here? That's maybe 5 or 10 minutes away from my house as opposed to 2 hours from my house. Um, but congratulations on the closing. That's awesome. Um,
Thank you.
absolutely. What sort of lead sources do you work? Do you mind me asking?
A lot of my sources are Spear. I
Mhm.
get a lot of referrals, and that's the main things. I do pay for leads from Realtor.com. I haven't gotten any successful ones lately, but they used to be really good. But lately, I haven't gotten so many good ones.
Okay. Now, those Sphere folks that you're getting, those clients that are being referred to you by Sphere, you don't know a lot of those people directly. You're having to still build relationships with those folks. Is that right?
Some of them I know directly. The ones I'm working with right now are are people I don't know. So yes, I do have to build relationships, but majority of the time, it's like my daughter's classmate, college friend, or somebody from the family recommends one of their coworkers or something like that. But
Okay.
usually it's somebody I met at least once.
Okay. That's great. That helps. And the reason why I'm asking these questions, and I appreciate you sharing and participating. I know a lot of times when we get on these Zooms and things like that, we have a natural tendency to be like, I don't want to talk, I don't want to get called on, and that's totally fine. I don't want to put anybody in a position where they're uncomfortable, but I do want to encourage, if you do want to come off of Zoom, these conversations on these Thursday calls, I want them to be conversational and engaging, as opposed to us just kind of talking to you about information. And that's a point that we're going to make about what we're discussing today. But do appreciate it. And what we're going to talk about today, to that point specifically, is the value of the virtual consultation. Now, I know that the information that went out, kind of the highlight of what we're going to talk about today, had to do with buyers consultations. But what we're going to talk about is the value of leveraging a virtual modality for a variety of types of conversations. It doesn't have to be limited just to buyers. But data suggests that roughly about 40 to 50% of anybody that's going to buy a home in any given market is a first-time home buyer. And there's a population of folks beyond that that are people that have never sold a house before and maybe have bought a house. So you've got a greater than 50% chance that somebody that you're going to be talking to or engaging with, it's the first time that they've ever gone through something. And so we're going to talk about how to streamline your time a little bit, because I think how we do real estate is changing. And as Angela mentioned a minute ago, her average drive time is about 40 minutes. So if you think about the amount of time that you're having to put into getting ready, the amount of time that you're having to schedule out your showings, the time at the showings, the drive time back, hitting traffic, getting food, all of those things, it can be incredibly time consuming. And so how we work and maybe working a little bit more efficiently is the goal of what we're going to talk about today. But most importantly, leveraging a tool to get buy-in. And when I asked Angela, the Sphere folks that she works, a lot of the folks that were on the call last week were saying that they do work a lot of Sphere, which is great. Even if you're buying leads, our team procures a lot of online lead generation, but Sphere is always going to be your best and most reliable source because they're able to vet you from someone that is referring you over to them. But there's still going to be some level of relationship building and overcoming things because I do feel like folks that have hesitation to moving forward or apprehension about it, a lot of times their concerns, they're most often going to be rooted in things like the economy, interest rates, cash to close, overpaying for homes, things like that. But one of the things that's really unacknowledged and talked about is they're overcoming their apprehension to working with us because we are now interjecting ourselves into arguably the biggest financial purchase that they're ever going to have to make. And it's concerning and it's stressful. And they don't want someone that is going to stress them out or uncomfortable. Because again, this is something that a lot of folks have never done and have gone decades of their life without ever having to do something like this. So a big part of what we have to do is build trust and gain buy-in and things like that. And so we're going to talk today about the value of virtual consultations to handle that. I do think that the days of, again, your initial appointments with folks, showing a house, especially with the NAR changes to buyer's reps agreements, going to a listing appointment or going and having a cup of coffee. I think those days are they're still there, but we've been given a gift in that COVID prompted us all to accept the use of Zoom, regardless of what we think about how it may have impacted our children's education and quality of. It's still one of those things that we've accepted. So let's use it to our advantage. And I think that that's one of those things that's going to give us a competitive advantage as we move forward. But what we've talked about a lot to this point are starting it from ground zero, how to open and frame conversations, how to overcome stalls and objections, how to have really good open-ended conversations, and how to earn trust, and then how to transition to asking the appointment. Hey, based on what you've told me, I feel like the best next step for us is to do this, and learning how to get confident with it. So we're going to transition into some more of the operational side of things. So today we're going to talk about virtual consultations. Next week, we're going to talk about taking it a step further and allow Brent to run that call on the do's and don'ts and the lessons that we've learned leveraging partner models and how to really make your time more efficient. And then we'll talk about other team related things and some things called proof points and stuff like that through February. So again, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to put them into the chat or come off of mute and let me know. But if you guys don't mind, I know I asked earlier for some folks to tell me what kind of markets you work in, because I wanted to get an idea of geographic location. Rashonda mentioned that she's in Metro Atlanta. That's great. It's a densely populated area. So let's kind of get into it. So virtual consultations. I'm also curious if you guys can come off a chat or come off a mute or type into the chat. Have you really leveraged virtual consultations for any of your business to this point? And if you have you had any success with it? Have you not had any success with it? So I want to give somebody an opportunity, if you want to come off of mute, to share your experience with that. And if none of you have done that or none of you want to come off of mute, that's fine as well. But I'm curious to know if this is something that people have done to this point.
Hello, Michael. My name is LaTrasha Bostic. Hello. I have really used the Zoom for my business doing consults. I absolutely enjoy it because it's one thing. I used to think that I could really pick up on, the message, the conversation over the phone, but it beats nothing seeing them on Zoom, because when we do Zoom, they have to have the cameras on. And so I could really, see the body language and all of that. And I absolutely enjoy this. Well, second best, of course, to in person, but love, love, love virtual. Yes.
Okay, great. So if you don't mind, I'd like to ask a few follow-up questions. So do you require them being on camera when you're on those calls?
I do. I do.
Okay.
Mhm.
Have you had any pushback to that at all?
I haven't. Mm-mm.
Okay. Um, how long have you been doing this for?
The virtual,
Yes.
it really got started, when the pandemic happened.
It's great. So, yeah, hopefully today hopefully I'm not telling you anything that you don't already know. It sounds like you've had a lot of experience with it, and Omar even mentioned it as much and said that he may have some customers that may not be tech savvy. It's good that we're having to overcome those things. But let me ask you a question. How long are your drive times? If you're in Metro Atlanta as well, on average, how long does it take for you to meet with a client?
The longest drive, because I'm truly in the heart of the downtown area, it takes me about an hour and 5 minutes one way.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. So as these metro areas I mean, we've had massive surges in population. I mean, the town that I live in is a part of DFW. In the last census, there were 3,000 people there, but they expect something like 30,000, between now and 2030. So metro areas are booming in population. And so that's why I say it's getting maybe a little bit more of a challenge for us to get there. I know that we all probably would prefer to meet in person. I know I would, because you even mentioned some of the nonverbal cues. You know, when you're going out and showing a house, you have the ability to be able to shadow them. You know, when they walk into a house, to be able to see what they gravitate towards. You're able to do all those things, and we're somewhat limited on phone calls, as you mentioned, and even on Zoom, but if it allows us to work through that conversion cycle a little bit more and get us closer to the appointments that we're hitting where it's like really maximizing that time, it's great. You know, one of the agents that's on this call, Eric, he went and showed yesterday, and he's a newer agent, and he went out and showed about 8 houses. And that can sometimes take 4 hours, and that doesn't even include the amount of time that you're having to drive to it. But I always tell clients, hey, the first time that we get out and see some houses, we're going to see some duds. I mean, probably greater than 50% chance that the houses that we see initially, we're going to have an issue with. But the value in doing that is that the next appointment and the next appointment, we're going to be able to kind of hit the mark a little bit more. But can we cut out some of that by doing these virtual calls and say, like, all right, let's get past some of the things that we may or may not like. And so I think how people are facilitating the calls is something that we're going to talk about, because I've seen a lot of people try different methodologies. And I do think some things do absolutely work. Some things I would probably say maybe not do that or not as much. And one of the things when I talk about building trust is that when we can share screens and show them things as opposed to telling them, then it's really, really increasing our value there. So that's good. I'm glad to hear somebody's been doing that already. So it looks like we've got some comments in here. It's something that I offer, and this is from Omar. However, I find a lot of customers have not been tech savvy. Okay, I'm in Saginaw, Michigan. It's not a big city at all, maybe 50,000 people here right now. It takes about 10 to 15 minutes to get to most places about town. That's good. That's good. Um, uh, Again, I'm in a market where I've got a lot of houses that are a lot of new construction just south of me by like 10 to 15 minutes, and I wish more people would be looking there. But we just don't procure a lot of opportunities in that area right now. Um, so let's talk about that. If I'm on a call, and I know that earlier it was mentioned that a lot of the business that someone gets is by a lot of sphere. So already there's going to be a level of trust there. But if you are procuring leads online, again, I think one of their biggest objections is going to be us. So we're going to have to build a trust. So when you're starting to talk to somebody and say, hey, tell me what your wants and your needs are. How long have you been doing this? What experience do you have with this? Why is this important to you? What is it going to take for us to get you from point A to point B? What are concerns that you have? Asking a lot of these questions without trying to sell them on something first. It's, again, I say it all the time, getting the answers to the test before you answer and formulating a response custom to that and what their needs are. I know I can look at a contract or can look at a house at MLS and get a really good idea of what sort of leverage we have when it comes to writing an offer. But what if that person's really not concerned with that? What if their concern was 2 or 3 years ago when things were crazy and every house was going into multiple offer situations? Maybe what's most important to them is avoiding multiple offer situations. They're not worried about getting a deal. So how do we talk about then how best to make our offer stand out as opposed to getting you the best deal possible? So there's a number of different scenarios that we can look at, but when you talk about building trust and you say, hey, I have a client that earlier mentioned to me, they're like, we're thinking about putting it off because we have concerns about down payment. Okay, well, tell me a little bit more about that. Well, we're just concerned about how much it's going to cost, and we just don't know if we're going to have the liquidity to do it. Great. I could sit there and talk to you about that on that phone call. Absolutely, I could. That person probably wasn't expecting that call right now. So are they in the mindset to sit there and have that conversation? And I may ask for buy-in, like, well, hey, I know you weren't expecting a call right now, but could I talk to you a little bit more about this right now? Or I could switch gears and say, well, look, if you knew that there was something that I could show you that would maybe overcome your concern about cash to close and down payment, is that something that you'd want to learn a little bit more about? And if they say, well, yes, well, here's what I would love to do. I'd love to jump on a Zoom call with you so I can get a little bit better of an introduction with you, but also to show you how that works and try to make a little bit more sense out of it. Would you be opposed to doing something like that? And I think most people, if you build that trust and ask in a similar way, they're going to say, yes, I'm fine with that. Then you go ahead and schedule it. And isn't it nice if you can sit there and address concerns like that and basically educate somebody on the process and how a lot of this works on a 20 or 30-minute virtual call, as opposed to having to get ready, drive an hour and 15 minutes somewhere, meet them somewhere, and then in the in-person, home tour or something like that, you talk to them about that then. That person's not even thinking about looking at houses at this point. And I think in the past, again, we might say, well, hey, I'm going to send you some homes. Let me know what you want to go and see. When we go and see these houses, I'm going to have this conversation with you. What if we push that conversation up about like, hey, what is it that you're looking to do? What can we do to help you out? What are tangible next steps that we can take? Let's go ahead and knock this out on this virtual call so that we get all this buy-in. And I can do this in 20 or 30 minutes. I can be wearing shorts, flip-flops, just as long as I look presentable, head up or shoulders up, and it takes a lot less time to do it. I think we all have families and personal responsibilities and things like that, but imagine you're able to take then 3 or 4 clients and have 3 or 4 virtual consultations in a day, as opposed to maybe one person that you go out and go and show for a few hours, and that's just consumed all of your day. And so there's, again, operational and efficiency. There's a good reason for wanting to do it. But let's talk about what that actual conversation needs to look like. And I'm pause there for just a second before I get into some of the do's and the don'ts and best practices that I've employed that work well. Before I do, does anybody want to come off of mute, share any thoughts, or ask any questions as of right now? Nope. Okay. All right. So
I
virtual
could share
calls.
one thought.
Yeah, go ahead.
I really like what you're saying. I did have one time where I had my one of my current buyers. She was real concerned, like you said, about down payment and things like that. And I scheduled a call with me, her, and the lender. And we broke that down so much. She was like, "Wow, I didn't know all this." So, I mean, sometimes just educating them, like you said, will be what you need, so that when it's time to go, we're having a quality showing versus they still don't. Oh, I'm not sure and all that. So now you know how much you can put down. You know how much your down payment is, and we kind of work the numbers before we even go out, so that I'm not wasting my time on a property that you're not going to want to pay the monthly mortgage on.
I love that. And one thing I will say about bringing lenders on the calls, no offense to any lenders that may be on the call, they're good at what they do. They're looking at data and numbers all day. I sometimes it can I don't want to say backfire, but if you have someone that you are worried about, you could overwhelm with maybe too much information in a call like that. Sometimes I exercise caution with bringing someone on. I've brought lenders on the calls before, but sometimes they kind of get into the nuts and the bolts, and they maybe don't have the context of maybe being patient with that person, or they're thinking about just getting you to do a pre-approval app. And sometimes it can interrupt the flow with those folks in those situations, and it's no fault of the lenders. It's just like, maybe like, hey, take a breath for a second before you start just throwing like, hey, do a mortgage app. But what you also mentioned, which is good there, is how many of us have had clients that we've sent houses to and say, hey, let's go out and take a look at them. And then you go and see houses that don't fit in their budget. You go out and go and look at houses that are $500,000 or $600,000. Maybe their top end budget's 350 based on their mortgage pre-approval. Sometimes it's hard to get people bought into doing a mortgage pre-approval if they don't trust you. They're just like, I just want to see some houses first and then maybe talk about it. And we don't want to be rude or insulting to say, well, I can't show you houses until you do this. If I get on a virtual call and I spend 15, 20 minutes on a call and talk to you about how this process works and why it's valuable for us to go ahead and do that, then you might get a little bit more buy-in to that. And then as you mentioned, you might be saving yourself a lot of time. So there's a lot of value in doing those types of calls, but that's good. I appreciate it. Anybody else?
I was just gonna say, to coming from a point of trying to address them and what's in their best interests, hey, it's important to let's get you pre-approved, whatever that obstacle is we're trying to overcome financially. Let's see where we're at. Let's see what we can do here, because really I need to know, and we need to know where you stand financially as to what that purchase price is going to be, right? Because the last thing I want to do is take you to a home that's $500,000. You fall in love with it. You want to make the offer, and then you can't, you put in the offer because that's what you want to do, and then you can't qualify for it. Now you've lost earnest money or option money and the cost of inspections and all these things. So helping them understand why it's important to get pre-approved. One, we don't want to waste our time, and we don't want you to get emotionally invested, and we don't want you to lose out financially because you did get emotionally invested and we got the cart in front of the horse, so to speak. I think that's, if we come across that way, it shows that we care about you. We care about you emotionally, your mentally state, your financially, and our time. Like, my time is very important, and this is what I do. This is my business. So trust me to help make the best decisions and lead you through this process, right? Because none of us want to waste our time. And wasting our time looking at houses that we can't see, when instead we should be looking at houses that we can qualify for. That way you don't miss out on that other home that you could qualify because now someone else came in and got it while you were shopping for houses outside of your price range. That makes sense.
It does. And man, the worst is not just when you show the buyer, if they start bringing their kids and their kids start picking out the rooms. And you're like, no, you can't buy this house. But you've already seen it. The kids have already picked out the colors for the rooms and stuff. It's a horrible feeling. And that can just kill somebody's momentum and just destroy them. So you bring up a really excellent point when it comes to that. And it's sometimes, yeah, go ahead.
Maybe we set the boundaries and say, hey, if it's possible, I would suggest that you don't bring your kids until you've made a decision on yourself. Because I mean, I know I let my son will pull my heartstrings, and I'll make decisions based off of how he feels rather than my own decision. So let's let it be your decision first. And once you've narrowed it down and then you need help, let's get the feedback from the rest of the family. Right.
And, man, that's just so good. And on those virtual calls, I've got 2 small kids and I've got a 3-year-old, and she hates it when I get on calls. Let me just tell you, I've tried to balance work and personal life and separate the two. Unfortunately, there are just times where it's unavoidable. And my wife texted me the other day that my kid was sitting at her like work desk, and she asked her to go and grab something for her, and she goes, "No, I can't right now. I'm working. I'm on the phone." And I'm just like, I felt so horrible. I was like, please don't let this be happening. And so it's unfortunately unavoidable in certain situations, but she'll barge in on a virtual call. And I think we try to be so professional sometimes that we don't allow ourselves to be human beings. And if you have a kid that wants to jump on the call, I mean, I don't know how people feel about their kids being on social media or on camera or anything like that. My daughter has shown up to a handful of these virtual consultations, but it's just amazing how quickly a barrier gets broken down. Like, oh my God. And then next thing you know, you and the other person are sitting there and showing each other's kids and saying hi and getting off a task. But again, it's all about building trust. And whether you're working Sphere or past clients or something like that, there's always some relationship building and some trust that has to be in there. And it's really hard to articulate in a way that conveys trust and good, solid advice through text and even phone calls. Even if I sit here and have a 45-minute conversation with somebody and have a really good conversation, they don't know me from somebody else, you know, and that's why so many people choose to work with agents that they know as opposed to going to somebody that may be better at their job. You know, it's like, hey, I trust this person, and so we have to work on trust. And as you mentioned, you know, you see it all the time. I don't want to waste my time going out and doing showings if I don't have a pre-approval in hand or know that this is legitimate. So these virtual calls are a really good kind of like qualifying point to say, hey, let's talk about what this looks like. And I want to make sure that you're prepared and ready to go. And so I don't want to jump ahead. But for most buyers that I work with, if I'm doing a virtual call and today's Thursday, they tell me, hey, I want to go and look at houses on Saturday or Sunday. Hey, that's great. Here's what I want us to do as a next step. It's Thursday, it's 11 o'clock Central Time right now. As soon as we get off of this call, I'm going to go ahead and get you introduced to my lender. I want you to go ahead and work on that mortgage application right now so that we have an idea of what things look like prior to Saturday or Sunday. And I try to do it in a positive way as opposed to just saying, we need to see this so that we know that it's within your buy box. What I actually tell them is, hey, if you're able to go ahead and get your approval done and we see a house that sticks out to you, because I always ask the question at showings, on a scale of 1 to 10, where do you feel like you fall in this house? 1 being absolutely no, 10 being absolutely yes, where are you at? And if they say that one of these houses is at least a 7, then I say not to put any pressure on you, but that's in the territory of writing an offer, just FYI. And I'll even tell them that on that virtual call. If we get out and go and see some houses, I want you to be prepared because we don't know how quickly things can move. Things have not moved very fast lately. However, we're seeing some things pick up, but all it takes is one buyer that really likes that house, even if that house has been on the market for 180 days. So I'd like for you to go ahead and work on this. Let's get an idea. And then if you do fall in love with one of these houses, not only are we prepared, but to get you a better perspective of what this financial endeavor is going to look like, I can send that address to the lender. That lender can work up the numbers based on tax rate, your escrow, your P&I, all those things, and tell us what your monthly payments are going to be so that I can arm you with all of the information that you need to make the best decision for you all and your budget. Plus, we can look at some scenarios on maybe 2-1 buy downs, 1-year buy downs, or getting closing costs covered. Because you do have a lot of people that right now have financial concerns. And this is one of those things, again, not to jump ahead, but one of those I would suggest doing is sharing anecdotal evidence. I don't know how each individual state works, but with Texas and our MLS, after a house closes, you can see what concessions were. You can see the original list price. You can see what the offer price was, like what it closed out at, how many days it was on market, but also how much we can get in concessions. So whenever I have had clients that have been like, you know, it's February, it just started, I've got a lease through August, and I'm really worried about managing a mortgage payment and a lease payment. If I overcome that and say, well, if you knew that I could get some money out of the seller to help ease that burden of carrying both of those payments or help you break your lease, is that something that you'd want to learn a little bit more about? They say yes. Then what I'm going to do on that virtual call is show them anecdotal evidence where I pull up MLS of a house that I closed, that I got concessions for a client that had that specific scenario, and say, hey, look, this house was listed at $450,000. You can see where I got $12,000 in concessions from them. They had the same concern that you had. This allowed them to go ahead and break their lease, but they also had a little bit left over where they did a 1-year temporary buy down on their interest rate. So they were able to double dip a little bit on buyer benefits. And they're like, whoa, That's when you then demonstrate your value, what you're capable of doing. You make a little bit more sense out of things, but also you build more trust to say, okay, this person that just told me on the phone yesterday, like, oh, I may be able to get something out of a seller. Now you're actually proving it. Now you're actually showing like, hey, this is legit and this is possible. So that is a 100% to do that I'm going to share with you guys, is to use anecdotal evidence. I'm going to come back to that. Let's talk a little bit about those do's and don'ts. So the do's, be organized. If you talk to somebody and say, hey, I'd love to get you on a virtual call, it's 11:03 Central Time, and they say, yes, let's do it at 8 o'clock tonight. Okay, great. Give them some homework. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to shoot this calendar invite to you. It's going to have the Zoom link in it. I just need you to text me back and let me know that you got it, because I want to make sure that you have it. And then just give them that as like homework, because it's keeping them actively engaged. And then you also say, hey, what we're going to cover are your concerns about cash to close, overpaying for a house. And what I want you to do is jot down any specific questions that you have. And I want us to be able to address those once we get on the call. How does that sound? They're like, all right, great. Because then there's really a reason to get on this call with you. So be very diligent, very specific, give homework. That keeps people engaged. And then again, make sure that you're sending that, but also show up on time. I think that goes without saying. We're always constantly interviewing. And so just be present, be on time, be prepared. Solve people's problems. Again, we've talked about it in overcoming objections. Someone tells you like, man, I really like this neighborhood because it's got a school that I really want my kids to go to, but I'm super concerned that it's going to be outside my price range. Well, why don't we just jump online, take a look at MLS and see what's within that range and take a look at some of those houses. How does that sound? All right. Okay, cool. Well, then we can at least look and I can actually show you so that I'm not just telling you, oh yeah, there's nothing in your price range there. Because what if we're looking online, you see something that's maybe $15,000 outside of what they tell you, and you can show them and pull up the pictures and say, what do you think about this house? They're like, oh my gosh, we actually really like that. We like that feature. We like this, the way the kitchen is. It looks nice. I know this is $15,000 above that budget of what we talked about. If you knew that I could get that price down within your budget, is that something that you'd want to learn a little bit more about? Well, yes, absolutely. Great. When are we going to go and see this house? Oh, I'd like to go and see it Saturday. Great. What I'm going to do is get you over to my lender now. I want to make sure that that's within our buy box, but also we can run the numbers to see what your monthly payments are going to look like if we're able to get the sales price down within your budget. Cool. Awesome. Great. Solve problems. Be a problem solver. You know, DFW is such a massive market. I feel folks that are moving here from out of state. I've got 3 active clients right now, 2 moving from California, 1 moving from Boston. They don't know anything about the area. I do. And, you know, one of them where they're working, they're just like, I don't want to be with outside of about 15 minutes away from where this location is. All right, well, let me actually show you a map of DFW. And let's talk about the specific communities that we may want to look at and say, hey, you know, on your drive, you're going to encounter this or this or that. But anything outside of this, we're going to want to avoid. As opposed to just saying, oh, yeah, I think you'd be a great fit for this town or this town. Actually show them like, hey, here's your drive time. Here's the highway. This is a cross street. This is where a lot of traffic is. Here's where a lot of traffic is clean and you're not going to encounter a lot. You know, problem solve again. Show them again physically, like share your screen. It's so easy. Like if I go and have a cup of coffee with somebody in a buyer's consultation, I want to show them what a 1 to 4 contract looks like. Sitting there flipping a bunch of pages and it's overwhelming. If I could sit here and just real quickly screen share with you and say, hey, let me talk to you about how option period works. Let me pull this up. Oh, okay, great. I can actually see it. There's some data, and I actually looked it up to make sure I wasn't lying. There is some data that suggests that people that are in a classroom environment, again, you're supposed to be focusing. 10% of people retain 10% of what they hear on a phone call. They retain 20% of what they read, and they retain 50% of what they're shown. And that's in like an environment where you're supposed to be paying attention. If I call somebody that's not expecting a call and I say, hey, I want to talk to you about how a 2-1 buy down works or a 3-2-1 buy down works, they're not going to remember any of that. And probably I'm going to wear them out to the point they're not going to want to talk to me anymore. If I can actually show you how some of these numbers work, some anecdotal evidence, then I have a 40% chance greater likelihood that you're going to actually retain that information, so that when we go to writing an offer, I don't have to sit here and Zoom with you on another offer, like a call where we're going to go through each phase of the offer and what we're going to negotiate. I'm going to say, hey, you remember when we talked about this? This is what I'm going to write in here. Oh, okay, great. Sounds good. And you're making sense out of things. Build the relationships. Again, if I talk to somebody today and I say, hey, why don't we get on a Zoom call? I've got 2 people that I've talked to this morning already that I'm scheduling for Zoom calls. And I'm going to spend about 30 minutes probably on each one of these calls. I'm going to spend that first 10 minutes just relationship building. Hey, tell me a little bit more about yourself. Have you had any experience with it? How long have you lived in the area? What brought you here? What do you folks do for a living? Have you found any places that you like going? Or there's still some things on a personal basis that you want to get the most out of living here? How long have you been leasing? What is your lease payment? Where do you live? Like, let's pull it up on a map. I want to build a relationship with you. Then I want to get into the nuts and bolts of how I'm going to get you from point A to point B. And then the last 5 minutes are talking about next steps. So having a structure in what that virtual call looks like is going to be important. The first week we got on these calls, if any of you were on, we talked about framing, how important it is to frame. Hey, I'm giving you a call today because I wanted to talk to you about this, this, and this, and talk about next steps. How does that sound? Great, awesome. And I'm going to go through that. If I get you on a virtual call, say, hey, look, earlier we talked about your concerns about having cash to close. I want us to talk about that. I want us to look at some examples of how that works, talk about any potential next steps, but also want to get to know you folks a little bit more. So tell me a little bit more about you guys. And I'm going to spend that first like 10, 15 minutes just relationship building. Again, it's just about building that trust. Because then when I show them all this stuff and I tell them there really shouldn't be any question about engagement and doing things. I mean, if they decide, no, we don't want to do it at that point. Hey, I've done everything in my power to get you to this point. But guess what? I didn't have to spend 3, 4, 5, 6 hours of an entire day doing it. I spent 20 or 30 minutes doing it. And I can just go right on to the next person. Make it make sense, again, for their specific situation. What's your concern? What can I show you? How can we get past it? Does that make sense? And temperature checks. Talk about that all the time. I even pause on these calls. I want to stop right there and ask if this makes sense to you or if I'm overwhelming you. Taking a breath, pausing and saying, hey, does this make sense for you? Okay, great. What are you unclear on? Make sure that it makes sense to them. And again, just be engaging. Tell a funny story, tell an anecdote. How was your day? Don't be afraid to be a human being. Again, I think we're so concerned with being professional realtors that we sometimes don't allow ourselves to be ourselves. Do that. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the don'ts for a minute. And I apologize if anybody's been doing any of this stuff, but these are things that I've just seen that have not worked for a lot of people. One, don't overshare. Don't saturate them out. We have buyer's guides that are about 30 pages long. And we had agents that would be like, all right, cool. I want to go through the whole process with you. And they would literally go page by page and say, all right, here's what an option fee is. Here's what an earnest deposit is. Here's how long it works. Here's what this means. Here's what tidewaters and annexation means. All of this stuff. And it's just like, boy, you just burned somebody's brain. Like, again, they're only going to retain some of that. Why are you sharing all this information with them? Why? It's just not a good use of time. You're going to burn somebody out. They're going to show more apprehension than they did getting onto the call. Make it applicable to, again, the things that they have told you. And I always preface it, again, you got to give somebody a reason to want to continue to talk to you. Well, hey, look, when we go and see houses this Saturday, if you find anything that you like, I want to talk to you a little bit more at that point about what an offer looks like. I don't want to overwhelm you right now. I do want to get you prepared to say, if we find a house that you like, I want to make sure that we know that you can afford it. But 2, there are going to be some fees that you're going to want to put down to secure that home, but we'll talk a little bit more about exactly what that looks like when we go and see the house. And then that's when I might talk about that part of it, appraisals, inspections, things like that. Compartmentalize your steps, but also give somebody a reason to want to continue to work with you and talk to you because you're constantly bringing them knowledge at every interaction. Realtors, we do a ton of work. We do a ton of stuff. It doesn't mean that we have to burden them with educating them on everything on that initial call. It's just too much. Other coaching mentors suggest to get away from using the question, does that make sense? Instead, do you have any questions? I think it's whatever you're comfortable with and whatever you feel works. I've been through so much coaching that I've just taken from each thing and applied it to how I feel it works. You know, when I talk about opening and introducing calls, the way that somebody taught me was just like, be very specific. Hey, this is Mike McCullough with this broker. I'm calling because it looks like you were looking at some homes. What I'd really like to do is have a very comprehensive conversation about your wants and needs. What does it look like? How we can get you to the next step, and then talk about those next steps. Before I do, I want to make sure that I answer any questions that you have. I've simplified it to just say, hey, saw that you were looking at some homes online. I wanted to check in with you and see what I could do to help you out. So it just is what works for you. I wouldn't say that certain coaching does or doesn't work. But I always try to temp check, just because I don't ever want to assume that somebody understands what I'm talking about. Like, hey, does that make sense? Am I being clear on that? Because if I need to articulate it a different way, I do it. But I think when you say, do you have any questions? It's not a bad thing to say. I would always just lean on open-ended questions and frame that just differently, to where you say, do you have any questions? Because you're giving them an opportunity to say no. I would maybe reframe it to say, what questions do you have? Because then you're not allowing them to say no. They would have to say, I don't have any questions. Or it's getting, can you talk a little bit more about that? So that's maybe the only suggestion that I would change there. And again, the best way that I could sum it up is just to say, just don't overwhelm them with too much information. Just keep it simple. I mean, there's so much that we do on every single interaction, every single transaction. Again, we don't need to burden them with that. We just need to say, hey, I'm here to hold your hand through this process. I'm here to educate you on what we need to educate you on right now. I'll kind of highlight what we're going to talk about before, but I want to make sure you're on board with what we're talking about now. And it's like, okay, great. All right, when we go and see houses, then we'll talk about it. And as far as also demonstrating value on those calls, if you all have done a lot of showings and you have an eye for what you look for when you're walking a property, like what I do whenever I show somebody a house, I say, hey, look, here's the deal. When we get to this house, I want to follow you. I want to walk around you and follow you and see what you like and what you don't like. It's not my job to tell you that a house is busted or anything like that. I just want to prepare you for things that I see and point them out to you, because I live by the code, no surprises. I don't want there to be any surprises. I don't want you to fall in love with something and then something that I saw that I could have told you about. But also, when you kind of educate somebody on what to look for, it makes a little bit more sense out of them. And what we're going to talk about next week is the partner model. I think a lot of people have concerns that when they send somebody to, like Shawami, for example, is a big showing service. If they send somebody from Shawami to go out and show a house, that Shawami partner agent's not going to be able to do a good job of articulating things that you are. Well, when you go and show them and you can educate them on what to look for, these folks feel a little bit more of an ownership in this process. Like, yes, they made sense out of this and we want to look for this. And then you're going to find that your clients are saying like, hey, we noticed this, we noticed that. And none of that is designed to talking them out of buying a house. It's just to say, like yesterday, I went and showed houses. One had gutters, one didn't. Like, hey, man, I just want you to be aware, because you may not be thinking about this, but when you have a house that doesn't have gutters, that water is going to pull at one part of the roof, and then it's going to create a little bit of a crater around this part, and it's not distributing the water properly. It's not that big of a deal, but it's going to show up on an inspection report. I want you to be aware of that. Oh, okay, great. So it's just, again, make sense out of things for folks, but sometimes you can point that stuff out on those virtual calls. Like if I pull up an MLS listing and I have an eye for what I'm going to be looking for, like if I pull up MLS and their yard is just desolate, looks like somebody set fire to the yard, I'm probably going to say something to them like, hey, this house, I'm just letting you know what I'm seeing is that maybe this yard's not taken care of. I think we're going to find some examples of lack of care for the home, not because they wanted to, maybe they just don't know. So don't be surprised if we show up and expose irrigation lines or dirty filters or something like that. And they're just like, okay, so show your value and say, like, if somebody sends you 10 homes, say, hey, I want to narrow this down to maybe 5 or 6 that we can squeeze into this time that we're going to be looking at. Let's look through some of these photos. Let me give you an idea of what I'm seeing just based on the photos. I'll make some calls. We can still go and see them if you want, But based on what you told me, you said you don't want this or you don't want that. Let's look at these pictures real quick and see if there's anything that's alarming that maybe we knock that house out. Okay, cool. And then we're narrowing that search down a little bit more. So it's a lot of information, a lot. I hope that I'm not burning you guys out on this stuff. It's what I'm talking about. Like, don't burn out on things. But this has been a game changer for our business, for the folks that are doing it. Yesterday, I had to drive 2 hours to a closing, had to leave there, drive 30 minutes to go get keys, 30 minutes back to the closing and make it back by the time they were done signing, then drive another hour to another closing. Then I had to drive to Dallas to go show houses. I had to go drop something else off, had to drive back up to McKinney. And I'm saying all these town names, you don't know what I'm talking about, but I ended up spending almost 12 hours driving yesterday. And it's kind of unavoidable, but how much of that could have been done virtually? A little bit. But when you think about showings and building your pipeline out, if you're spending all that time in the car having to drive and do things that you could do virtually, you're taking away from other parts of your business. And that's when things start slipping through the cracks. And that's the last thing that we want. How much business have you missed out on because of things slipping through the cracks because you were focused on other stuff? And as we progress along through February and March, we'll talk about leveraging, maybe virtual assistants to do some of the monotonous things that we have to do, and pulling your searches and scheduling your showings and writing your offers and Shawami and all that stuff. We'll talk about all those things. So looks like there's a comment in here. Example, I use full stop. What can I explain further, or issues that need to be addressed? Make eye contact with each person in your showing group. Hey, that's great, but please stop me if there's anything. I do this away from camera at showings, works great in the Zoom call as well. He makes a good point. If you're the type of person that gets weirded out looking at people, minimize the Zoom, because they can still see you through the camera, and you could look at an email or something like that and talk about it, or you can look at MLS. You don't have to sit there and look at the camera the whole time. But yes, eye contact's important, very much. So virtual calls. Again, do's and don'ts, the value of them. It's building on things. Hopefully what you guys are seeing is that we've been talking about getting people to trust in that an appointment with you is the best thing for them. I want to show you value. I want to demonstrate these things to you. I want to show you that it makes sense. I want to work through your problems and all of these things. And if you guys can do all of this stuff very well, you're going to see so many more clients. And leveraging the tools that we have, whatever it is, partners, virtual assistants. Omar, if you're only having 10 or 15-minute drives, bless you, that's amazing. I wish that was the case for me all the time. It's just not that way. But could you, if you have somebody that maybe has another buyer that's involved, say like, hey, let's all get on this call together. Maybe if you guys are at work, let's use lunchtime to do this so that we can prep for the showings that we have tonight. I do that a lot. If I'm scheduling showings for that weekend, I'm saying, hey, I'm looking forward to meeting you there. Can we jump on Zoom to talk about some things before we get there? And this is where I'm going to finish. NAR has startled the crap out of real estate agents when it comes to getting representation agreements. And it doesn't need to be that way. It's just how things are. You're getting a lot of pushback from buyers that are like, I didn't have to do that before. Why am I having to do that now? On these virtual calls, after I go through all this stuff, I will finish the call by saying, hey, look, well, there's something I want to show you. I want to make sure that you understand how all this works. Let me actually pull this up, and I'll pull up a copy of my IABS form, say, hey, no matter what I get paid, because I'm not one that's negotiating a lot of commissions out of a buyer if a seller isn't paying it. If I write 3% into a buyer's rep and then I go to a builder or a home that's doing 2% or 1%, to me, it just is what it is. I don't think we're in a market, particularly where we are at right now, where I can expect a lot of buyers to pay for this, because a lot of the buyers that we have are VA. It's defeating the purpose of cash to close. You have a lot of people that have bumps on their credit, and it's hard getting them approved. Their DTIs are really slim. I can try to negotiate as much as I possibly can out of a contract, but it just sometimes is what it is. But I want to reinforce to you that I'm here to work for you. You're going to be my client, and I'm going to put in all the effort that I can, regardless of what that looks like, even though we don't know what it looks like unless I call. So I show them the buyer's rep and I say, here's what you need to understand about this. It protects you. It allows me to work for you. I'd love an opportunity to work for you. This is what all this looks like. And I want to explain how this one little thing that's a change with NAR works for you. And I'll explain it to them. We even charge transaction fees. And oh, by the way, other compensation, I'm writing in transaction fee. It's the cost of doing business, and just make sure that once we go under contract, all the things on the back end with the communication with all the parties involved is taken care of. Oh, okay, great, awesome. No resistance to that, none. And if I ever have had someone show resistance, it's that clause that says, if sellers do not pay this, then the buyer may be liable for it. I'll just say like, hey, you just need to understand that I'm not going to ask you this. If you want me to email you and tell you, I can. But then I'm just sending them that buyer's rep, and I'm getting 4 to 5 buyer's reps a week right now doing it this way with these virtual calls, because I'm scheduling about 5 to 7 appointments a week virtually, getting about 4 or 5 buyer reps a week doing it this way. So if you have any concerns about that, this is also a really good way to address that, as opposed to texting or calling and saying, hey, I need you to sign something before we go and see these houses. So, and we've got one mission. Greater permission to head into a doctor's appointment. Have an awesome rest of your day. Thank you so much. All right, so we've got 5 minutes before we jump off. If nobody has anything, we can end it now. But if anybody has any questions or comments or feedback they'd like to share, now's the time to do it.
I have one question. So if you're meeting with them via Zoom the day before you're going out on the tour, you're not preparing the buyer's agreement until the day before, or do you already just have it prepared, but you just talk to them before you go?
So you're saying that if I talk to somebody, like, doesn't really matter when I talk to them, but I set showings up for Saturday and I say, hey, I want to get on a virtual call with you, and say we do that virtual call today. Are you asking if I do or don't address it right then and there?
I was asking as far as completing the document, like are you not completing a document, or you already have it completed, or before you I'm thinking of time, that's all. So like I'll have mine's already done and then talk to them, and then once I've talked to them I send it. Is that what you do, or are you waiting until you talk to them and then send it?
So I'm waiting, and if I
Being
can't get
prepared.
on a virtual call with them, then I'll make sure to text them or call them. Like I'm addressing it in some form or fashion before the actual showing for sure. Because we're not supposed to do that. So what I do is I will show them that, and I won't have it typed up a lot of times. I'll just say like, I'm walking through it. Your information is here. Broker's information is here. I'm doing this, and this, explaining that part to them. Does that make sense? Cool. And that's a part of the homework that I do give to them. Hey, I want you to go ahead and talk to my lender and do your approval app before we go and see these houses, if possible, because we can do all these things. If they don't get that done, am I not going to go and show houses? Probably not. But I'll talk to them at that showing, say like, hey, we need to get this done before we see any more houses. But yes, I will tell them I'm sending this buyer's rep to you as soon as we get off the call. We do need this before we can go into into any homes. I need you to sign this prior to, like, if I'm showing houses at 12 o'clock on Saturday, I need you to have this signed by 10 o'clock on Saturday, so that I'm not having to drive out there. Most of the time, as soon as you send it out to them, they're signing it right then. If they don't do it that day, I'm texting them first thing in the morning. Hey, just a reminder, we need to get this. If you have any questions, let me know. But yes, I am telling them that that's part of the homework, that I'm sending it to them. They need to get it signed by a certain amount of time, or I'm not going out, or I'm not going to commit to sending Shawami out to go and show you. And it just is what it is. If they push back on that, that's why you schedule a bunch more appointments throughout the week. We have to assume that out of however many that we get to this point, that there's going to be a certain amount that are going to fall off, and a certain amount that are going to fall off, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so, yes, I tell them you need to get this signed by the time that we go and see houses, or I leave the house. Fair? All right, cool. And again, I think if you're doing a good job in that virtual consultation, building up trust and demonstrating value, there should really be no concern. But I also do tell them, hey, if we go and meet in person and you think I suck, you don't want to work with me, you're like, oh, he's annoying, I don't want to deal with him, he chews too loud at his gum or whatever, I'll tear this thing up in front of you. It's not going to bother me. And I think when you do stuff like that, you show and demonstrate a level of confidence that they're just like, okay, well, this guy seemingly doesn't care. willing to break this if we don't like him. Okay, fine. And I've had that happen once or twice, but it's definitely not the rule. It's an exception. So,
Okay. I do
yep.
pretty much the same thing. Okay. Thank you
Yep.
for that.
Question, Michael, and it's kind of
Yes,
off
ma'am.
topic, but I need to do a tenant screening for my landlord, or she needs to screen. And I usually use SmartMove through TransUnion, but the tenant doesn't have a social security number. SmartMove requires a social. Now, I know we have Forewarn, and I've used it for myself, but I don't know that we can share that information with our landlord. I mean, there is a waiver that I have with the application that says, you know, I don't know, I don't remember, I don't know it exactly, but there is a waiver that we are sharing in that. But I don't know that Forewarn has a specific rule against sharing. Do you know, or do you have a resource for background checks for like ITINs?
So that is a good question. And honestly, I'm not going to be a ton of help on that because usually what I do is I don't know what you're using for, like if you use DigiSign or Zip Forms or whatever. I use Zip Forms for our leases if I have a lease listing, and it provides a link. I don't have it on me right now, but if you can text your email in there, or I can get it from our assistant, and I can send you that link, and they run a background check, and they just basically send you the results of it. And I think it may have that PII hidden on it. It just shows you like credit and criminal background. If your landlord tenant is okay with that level of information.
Okay.
Outside of that, I don't know, but I will ask. I mean, I know you're out of state. I'll ask my broker
No, I'm
if
in
that's
Texas.
some.
I'm
Oh,
in
you
DFW.
are? Okay. Okay. Let me ask our broker of record, see if they can give me any feedback on that, and then I will follow up with you. I got your email address here. So,
Okay, cool. Thanks.
yep. Anybody else? No. Well, guys, hey, thank you so much. Next week, Brent's going to be talking about leverage models and really maximizing your time. So we'll see you guys next week for that. Have a good one.
Thank you.